Hello and welcome to another 5-minute drawing lesson. Today I'm going to talk about the most common mistake I see people make when they're drawing wheels in perspective, or just generally ellipses in perspective. So let's have a look. Why are these so bad and objectionable? Let's get rid of this title and have a look at a circle. So here's a circle on a flat plane, on a square. And if we turn that in perspective, there we are, there's the plane going off to a vanishing point. The ellipse, well, the circle has become an ellipse, and an ellipse has a major axis, the long one, and the minor axis, the short one, and they're always at right angles to each other. Whatever happens, the major and the minor are at right angles. The major is the longest distance, the minor is the shortest. Easy enough. So if I was to ask you which of those two was most important, you'd be forgiven for saying the major, because major sounds more important than minor. And I think that's where a lot of people trip themselves up. They sort of think that this major axis, the big one, the vertical one, is the most important one to think about when drawing wheels. Let's just hide those badly drawn ones. And let's have a look. So if you're thinking that the vertical is the most important one, you put your vertical line in. That's this one here. And then draw your ellipse on top. Just line it up to this vertical. So the top's at the top, bottom at the bottom, and it looks dreadful. And why is that? Well, for us, when we're drawing in perspective, the most important axis for us isn't this vertical, it's the line of the axles. So if we hide this, we get rid of this nasty wheel again, and I'll show you where the axles are. So here are two lines indicating the lines of the axles going right through the centres of the wheels, through to the centre of the wheels on the far side. And they obviously follow perspective. And these are the ones that are most important to us. This is what we're going to construct our ellipse onto. So we're going to draw an ellipse, and I'll edit this. And we can see in this little useful guide, when I make ellipses on here, I can stretch them around. We can see these little dots, and there are 2 dots for the major axis and 2 dots for the minor axis. And the thing we want to do is make sure that our minor axis sits perfectly on our axle lines. So we can scale our wheel, making sure that the minor axis is sat nicely on the axle. And when we're happy, we can say that's done. And we'll do another one at the front in the same way. So make sure that our minor axis is sat nicely on the axle. Just have to concentrate a bit. Okay, and then we've got 2 wheels correctly drawn on their axles. So notice that the major axis that we were talking about earlier, that used to be vertical when we were looking at it side on, is now quite tilted. Remember, this has to be a right angle. But that vertical line can be important if you want to check your ellipse is drawn correctly. So if we take a vertical line down from the centre, hopefully it will touch where the bottom of the wheel touches the ground. So it's the contact point of the wheel. I'll take a different colour. If you were to draw your ellipse too narrow, it's still correctly aligned on the axis. Let's have a look. I'll make it a bit bigger so that it touches the ground. So this ellipse is now too narrow, and we can check that by taking our vertical line down. The contact point is now over here, so it's not vertical anymore. It's showing us that this ellipse is too narrow, and the same would happen if we draw one that's too thick, too wide. So if I draw another one, and this time stretch it this way too much. So we're seeing too much of the side of the wheel. It's still correctly aligned, like it should be. But now the contact point is over here, so it's not vertical like it should be. So we've got a problem with this. So the one we drew, the black one, is pretty much correctly aligned. The same with the front one. If we take our vertical down, it reaches this contact point here, which is okay. So when you come to drawing perspective cars and things, anything that has perspective circles on them, you don't always, unless you're doing a technical drawing, want to be going into the making planes and stretching them in perspective and dividing things up and working out contact points. It becomes too much like a technical drawing, and rather than just a loose sketch. So what I tend to do, if I'm just sketching them and I'm not too fussed about how accurate or precise they are, I'm not doing a technical drawing, I tend to just draw my axles and then freehand sit some ellipses on them. And there you can see kind of 4 wheels very loosely placed, roughly in space. I can tidy these up much more later, but it just gives me an idea of 4 wheels in space, and on top of that you can then construct a car of some sort, So good practice for this would be just to draw pairs of axles and sit some circles on. Try to imagine 4 wheels on those axles in space and try to draw them at various different angles. Always with your circles at right angles to the axis. So this is kind of a front-on view. So if your car was, so we're looking there's your car from above. So we're looking down on it this time. So just practice pairs of axles and pairs of wheels. If you like, you can think of them as cylinders, because they ought to be the same size both sides. So tapering cylinders if the perspective is quite dramatic. Yeah, so that's probably the best starting point I can think of, is just to think of either cylinders or 4 discs nicely suspended in 3D space. Good luck. See you on the next one.